Chapter 46. Leaving Abbeyshrule behind. Free from the glare of finger-held curtains, he relaxed at last as he bade farewell to his father and the hackneyman at Mullingar railway station. There was a while to wait before the train was due, so after inquiring about the cost of the ticket, he left his case in with the lassie, saying he'd be back in a few minutes. A full-scale argument was going on between two hackney drivers as he hung around outside. It seemed one was taking fares from the other, and true to their calling, they argued like a haggard of turkeys until he politely asked if they'd have the change of a £20 note. Distracted and smelling a potential fare, they reached for their wallets in the glove compartments. Meanwhile, Seamie palmed the 20 and handed over a tenner. The speed of the hand deceives the eye, Tess told him when she was showing him the 3-card trick and how to hide the dice. Returning to their argument, they failed to spot the sleight of hand. Hearing the train approaching, Seamie beat a hasty retreat. Euston Station became Westland Road, then Raheny, before the shop just short of Sutton and Howth, as the train passed out from the city and into the suburbs by the sea. A refined area mostly, it boasted big houses with even bigger gardens where palm trees waved in the wind, blowing in across the bay from Lambay Island and Ireland's Eye, a stone's throw from Howth Harbour. Mikey had mentioned many of the great walks he and his crew got stuck into at least once every month. The Hill of Howth was reckoned to be one of the greats, both for scenic grandeur and opportunity. Seamie fell around the place laughing as Mikey told him of the many scams they perpetrated on the locals as they played puck with convention and the walk organizer Gabby, also known as Mighty Mouse, due to his diminutive size. It was easy to pull the wool over their eyes due to the number of walkers and the close relationship between most of them, but Barney was a different kettle of fish altogether. Those who weren't in one of the cliques knew better than open their mouths, or they'd find it full of their own shite within jig time. It was rough justice, but effective, and rarely needed to be repeated. Mikey was a couple of years ahead of Seamie and knew the ropes well. Though different in many respects, the two brothers had a close bond and looked after each other, especially on the playing field or if a row broke out between the townies and the culchies. Apart from that, they went their own way, formed their own cliques, or became an integral part of a more popular one. In a college of several hundred young men, it was easy to keep a low profile, and many did. Not Seamie or Mikey, though. They were natural leaders and drew others around them like flies around a shite, as Griffin used to say when he couldn't get into the group due to his gaunch mannerisms. The brothers rarely spoke to each other and never commented on their lives around Abbeyshrule. What happened at home stayed at home and belonged to another life. All of this flooded through his mind as he walked behind Barney, who had been waiting impatiently at the station. He made no attempt to help with the luggage as he watched Seamie struggle with his cases. Unperturbed, he fell in behind the fast-striding prefect. Nor did Seamie bother with the other dozen or so youths who seemed to be heading in the same direction as he. There would be time to meet them later, he thought, as he coped manfully with the weight of his cases, packed tightly with homemade provisions his dear mother had prepared for him. There were a few other suspect items within, but he found a safe storage place for them later. Mikey had warned him of the mean whores who'd home in on the raw recruits, knowing they were carrying all kinds of goodies from the country. Over my dead body was the warning he gave the first lad that grabbed his case at the main door. But we're supposed to help you unpack, was met with an icy stare that brooked no interference. Barney handed them a room number as they crossed the threshold. Fucking 13A was the first thought that entered his head as he threw his cases on the bed and lay back for a moment to get his breath back. Still, it could be worse, he thought, as he searched for a safe hiding spot. It didn't take him long as his eagle eyes spotted a break in the wooden floor under his bed. Making sure his room was locked, he quietly shifted the bed and prized the floorboard loose. It had been done before, but whoever had done so hadn't time to withdraw his loot, as, to his amazement, it was still there. A pot of jam long past its sell-by date showed how long it had been since the previous occupant had passed on. 5 years seemed a long time, but the bottle of crested 10 would now be a crested 15 at least, and would provide interior heating through the coming winter. Perfect, he thought, as he carefully replaced the jam and other objects with his own. A quick route through the items revealed a small treasure trove, a heap of coins, a Stanley knife, a hunting knife, several pens and pencils, a slightly rusted torch, and a box of Johnnies carefully wrapped in a muslin bag. That brought a wry smile to his face as he wondered who the previous occupant might be, and more importantly, how he planned to use them. Someone like himself, no doubt. Someone who had something to hide from jealous or prying eyes, perhaps. It mattered little now as he wrapped his belongings carefully before replacing the floorboard. He certainly didn't want anyone coming across his stash or the love letters Annabel had written him over the past 2 years. They were for the long days and hard nights when he'd take comfort in their warm words. A meaner man never lived, Seamie thought, as he stood in line with the 100 condemned youths. A few of the Belfast brigade showed indifference, but it was not enough to hide their inner fears as Barney swept up and down the line with a corps that'd turn a funeral. I'll have to watch that cunt, Seamie swore inwardly as he scanned the line for potential allies. It was far too early to judge, but the Temple boy Buchel held promise. A hint of a wink drew an instant response. He relaxed a little. Ben was a big lad for a 14-year-old, a farmer's son. He'd be used to hard work and nature's whimsical ways. The slightest nod of the head reassured him he'd just made a real friend. He didn't need two when one good one would do. Feck Barney. The game was on, and he was no longer on his own. Thanks again, Tess. You never lost it. The inspection parade over, Barney ordered all to the refectory. Not a word until grace is over, he barked as the boys shot out the big room door and down the stairs as if they weren't there. The big Mike stood squarely in front of them as they screeched to a full stop and a comma in front of him. You big Mikes, he roared as he visualized the college falling around his ears. Get caught again and you'll all be like wallflowers for the next week, he threatened as he listed sideways to let the tsunami of hungry youngsters into the dining hall. The older lads were helping the waitresses bring the food to the tables. It was piping hot and smelled like a turkey. Hunger is a great sauce, he whispered out the side of his mouth as Ben left a dent in Gallagher's ribs. Fuck off and find a place for yourself, he growled, barely moving his lips. The pecking order was already in situ as alliances built up rapidly. Grace over. The decibel level rose like a murder of crows as the early hunger pangs subsided and hilarity swept into full flow. You fairly sorted that cunt out, Seamie laughed as he winked back. They'll not take it kindly, though, he said as he shook his head as he spotted the Northern Irish lads glaring across at them. We'll sort them out at the football, Seamie advised as he passed the empty plates to the end of the table. A roar from Barney followed a clatter of plates hitting the floor. Looking up, Seamie saw the cause of the rumpus. Gallagher had deliberately tripped young Mulligan, who was loading the plates onto the big trolley. I'll break his friggin' ribs this time, Ben swore, as he tried to get up to sort him. Seamie had a vice-like grip on his belt by now and kept him anchored against his will. Stay quiet, you idiot, he growled at him as Ben tried to break free. Do you want us all to be hung? Leave it, and we'll sort the whore out later. No point in giving ourselves away now and falling into their trap. Can't you see they're testing the waters to see who's who? You're right, Ben answered, as he eased back into the seat. Barney will sort it out for now and show us who's who instead. Up there for dancing and down there for thinking, he laughed, as he nearly took the skin off his knuckles as a sign of fraternity. The day shot past in a blur as the new recruits attempted to settle in. Seamie saw no more of Ben until tea time at 7. About to sit down, his 2 legs were swept from under him. Falling back, he hit his head off the bench as he fell. As he lay dazed, Ben exploded off the bench like a prize fighter and caught Gallagly fair and square with an uppercut. All hell broke loose. In seconds they were surrounded by an eclectic group of southern followers who swung like maniacs as the northern contingent sought to put Gallagly away from the fray. It was Seher and Ashley, labour in vain, as Ben towered over them. "Cover me," he shouted, as he drove into the middle of them, flinging bodies left and right as if they were mere stacks of barley. Though bleeding, Seamie was stuck into Gallagly as if his life depended on it. Barney's whistle went off like a machine gun, forcing most of the combatants apart. "Hold it right there, young man," Barney spoke in a voice that left no doubt as to who was in charge. Ben was fuming, but knew the upper ground had been gained and quickly simmered down. "That's better," Barney winked as he ushered him back to his seat. "I saw every bit of that, and the culprits will pay dearly," he shouted as they shook themselves down and sorted themselves out. Calling out a list of names, he ordered them to the principal's office immediately. "Over here, Séamus," he directed as he saw the young man being held erect by Ben. "Go get the nurse," he ordered as he examined the cut. "It's not as bad as it looks," he smiled as he sat the injured warrior down. "You covered yourself well, young man, and were well covered by Ben, but you'll have to take some punishment for getting involved," he added. But, was all Seamie got to say as Barney ordered him to the principal's office after the nurse was finished cleaning the cut. "There now, you'll be grand," she said as she cut and tied the loose end of the bandage. The shouting from the principal's office was reaching deafening point as he walked along the long corridor to the office. Frightened faces shot past him as he joined Ben outside the door. "Come in, you 2 big mikes," he ordered as he spotted him. "Do you think I have nothing better to do than waste my time with you 2 big hooligans?" he asked as they stood in front of him. They were about to speak when he silenced them with a winning smile. "I hadn't planned a regional game for some time yet, lads, but it seems to me that you're well matched, so we'll have it on Sunday instead of the Portrand Walk. Now, Ben, as captain of the Southerners, you have little time to get organised, but I think you have a team to match the lads from the north. Would you agree?" he added with a knowing smile. "Now get out of here," he roared, so as not to give the impression of favouritism. He zipped his lips by way of telling them not to utter a word or pretend that anything was other than what it should be in light of the fracas in the dining room. Like seasoned soldiers, they strode into the study hall with not a hint of a smile. Ripples of acclamation spread around the room as they took their seats. Barney stood tall as they sat down. "Now, the next time the likes of this bravado breaks out here, it will be over my dead body," he spoke fiercely as he thumped the rostrum. "But just in case any of you brave hearts should even contemplate it, I'm about to put all of you in your places." As he spoke, he produced a list of names he was promoting to prefects. Calling out Ben's name first, he followed it closely with those of Gallagly, Gibson, Murphy, McAteer, Malay, Best, and Seamie. Evenly balanced was the first thought to hit him, though he wasn't too happy to be pushed into the limelight that early. Outlining their duties, Barney spared nothing as he laid down the law. "1 step out of line and you'll answer to your prefects, before answering to me," he cautioned. "I couldn't have done better myself." Ben smirked as they were ordered to sit down. "Now for the good news," Barney smiled. "As you all know, we are accustomed to having provincial games from time to time. We hadn't planned on one for another couple of months, but the principal has decided that there's no time like the present, so we're going to have it next Sunday. The two captains will pick their teams tomorrow and after recreation and post them on the notice board for all to see. We need to put players into respective categories, so this will be as good a time as any to see where each player fits. I'll ref it myself, so you know what to expect," he warned. A burst of applause greeted the news and early redemption. Another round of applause greeted the respective captains, Ben and Gallagher, as they strode gallantly across the divide to shake hands. The gesture was warmly received in light of the potentially disastrous opening of the season. Used to the trimmings after the rosary, Seamie thought of the folks back home as he fell into bed. His mind rambled back to his favourite places as tiredness swept over him. Tess was leaning over the half door as he ran down the back of the hedge towards her. A warm smile lit up her angelic face as she spotted him. With one bound he was across the stream and waltzing up to her without a care in the world. "You'll land in the middle of it yet, child," she laughed as he laid his arm gently on her frail shoulders. "Is the kettle boiling, Tess?" he fired back as she stood aside to let him in. He nearly dropped with shock as a wondrous figure stood up from the heart and came to greet him. "How, in God's name," was all he could say as they fell into each other's arms. "Tess told me you'd be here, so I cycled over," Annabel answered with a mischievous grin. But you're in college somewhere. How did you get here?" he blurted out as he surfaced for air. "Ah, you too, Seamie, but there's no doubting Tess's power. We're here for now, and I know she'll get us back before we're missed," she said as she glanced anxiously at the old lady. "Don't worry your young heads about a thing," she said as she busied herself with a pan of potato bread. "Just enjoy the while and leave the travel arrangements to me. Let ye rest on the settle-bed there. You'll have a lot to say to each other, no doubt," she suggested as she fussed about the fire, preparing a bite for them. That done, and all happy, she lay back in her Sugon chair and fell fast asleep. The bell startled him. He looked to where Annabel lay and saw only rumpled sheets. She was gone. Glancing quickly around, he was amazed to see he was in his cubicle and not in Tess's palace. He wondered if he had been dreaming, but knew it couldn't be so, as his last act before he into a deep sleep was a long, lovely kiss. Why, he could still feel her arms around him as they fell asleep together. What kind of magic had Tess worked this time, he thought, as he threw back the sheets and jumped onto the cold floorboards. Barney was already doing the rounds as he washed himself with cold water. About to put on his shirt, he stood naked as Barney pulled the door open quickly and stepped inside the cubicle. "Not bad, young man," was all he said as he smiled and continued his rounds. Though a little shocked at the intrusion, he was none the less pleased at the brother's parting remark. The pattern of each day was very similar, but not boring. A 7:30 call led them to the chapel for matins, followed by breakfast and the first classes that ranged from a broad spectrum of learning and study. It didn't bother Seamie, as he had come through the hard school of Knoxwood Quigley. Although a slow learner initially, he had listened to Tess' advice and knuckled down to learning from one of the best. Quigley was a tough taskmaster, but only because he loved teaching and wanted to bring the best out of all his pupils, not just the clever clogs. In this he had few peers. His pupils headed the list in the primary certificate year after year. His proud boast was that the ones who failed wouldn't make great farmers, and in this he was absolutely right. He didn't mean that to be derogatory in any way, as he farmed himself and loved the freedom it gave him. He meant that it was a different type of intelligence, more suited to the outdoor life. Being able to read nature, plan good crop rotation and tillage, as well as managing animal husbandry, was time-consuming and demanding. He equated it to his many stories of the hunter-gatherers who roamed the Midlands many moons ago, the ancient Celts who hunted along the fish-filled Inny, used a subliminal intelligence to support their growing clans. They learned from experience initially, but soon self-appointed Quigleys taught the young around the campfires after rigours of a long day's hunting. Many of the farmers' sons whom the master taught went on to be successful in their own right and owed a lot to his sally rod. The rod soon sang the truth, as he often said. It sorted the men from the boys and the farmers from the intellectuals. Few fitted either frame, but it was enough to go on. There was no time for leniency or complacency, he often told the doctor, as they sipped a half one in the snug in Abbeyshrule. He wasn't a social animal, but there were a few who got reasonably close to him. Neither was he selective in his companions. He'd enjoy the company of the irascible clerk as much as Father Pat or Hewart, even though he was of the other persuasion. His neighbours, Gard Fay and Ned Gagan, were close allies too, as they aided and abetted each other in keeping the peace, providing basic sustenance to the poor and free boots to the poor of the parish. Religion was paramount and had pride of place in his school. A fervent Catholic, he never missed Sunday Mass and had little respect for anyone doing so. Not only did he prepare his pupils well, he also provided a string of mass servers for every occasion. There were only a few who could handle the thurible, but Mikey and Seamie, along with Mullen and Cahill, did the honours when necessary. It was after May devotions when a knock came on the sacristy door. Father Lynch was called to Maria's deathbed. Leaving the two brothers in charge of locking up, he hurried away. Although anxious to join the Coal Hill gang for a bit of excitement on the way home, their attention was drawn to the bottle of wine which the priest had forgotten to put away in his haste. Checking the church was empty, Mikey ran to the front door and locked it. He did the same on the short aisles, because they'd be exiting by the sacristy door and would drop the key off at the priest's house by the airfield. Seamie had already started on the wine, knowing that was the game plan. "It tastes like cat's piss," he grinned as Mikey put the bottle to his head and swallowed half of it, nearly choking as he did so. "It could be worse," he spluttered as he handed it over. It didn't take them long to finish it either. Hiding the bottle in their bag, they locked up and headed home, as high as kites. Yahooing and singing, they flew along the road to catch up on their gang, who were pairing off by the new time as they approached Belton's plantain, a suitably secluded copse of young firs that would allow them to enjoy the pleasures of a shift. Little realizing they were half-cut, the girls shifted allegiances in order to capitalize on their exuberance. They had the full of their hands before they knew it, as the lads threw caution to the winds and went places they'd never been before. Back at class, it was easy to keep up one's interest as new subjects added flesh to the bone. Chemistry and physics became a fascination to the youths, as Professors Cuthbert and Mad Mike vied with each other in outrageous experiments, engaging the students as few of the other teachers could. Minor explosions, loud bangs, and even louder guffaws welcomed each successful venture into the realms of the unknown. Their showman's style was so unusual that it totally absorbed their classes and opened the eyes and minds to the wonders of the world. Mixing small quantities of ammonium nitrate with sugar provoked a mini blast combined with a cloud of smoke that woke the lads up with a bang. McMiniman was the first to react, as to great amusement he held an old chair aloft as if the arse had just been blown off it. "You did that yourself," Seamie laughed as order slowly replaced chaos. As the day wore on, there seemed to be less and less time to attend to one's personal interests. A buzz of activity ran through the place like a storm brewing. If not at class, they were studying, eating, tidying up, or preparing for football, handball, cross-country running even. And that was only after a few days. A bloody fine start, Seamie thought, as he could only conjecture what might unfold as the weeks progressed. The odd chance they got to chat was like manna from heaven to Ben and Seamie. They relished the moments to compare notes, talk of their homes, families, girlfriends, and life's experience up to that point. Ben couldn't get enough of Seamie's stories about Annabel. Though a big lad and reasonably aware of the birds and the bees, he was a novice as far as the fair sex was concerned. Though no professional himself, Seamie could see the warning signs that Tess had alerted him to when he told her he was off to a male-only boarding college. She always picked her moment to advise him on what he might encounter along the way of life. She had seen it all on her travels, she informed him one evening, as they tore into a pan of potato cake and a few heels left over from Flynn's loaf. Her protege was by now wide to the ways of the world, but she knew also that alone was not enough. That alone was not enough to safeguard him from the praying mantas that would surely hit on him. His unruly mop of blonde curls and good looks were sure to attract attention from male and female alike, so she took him on a tour of the parish to show him who to look out for. As they hovered over barn and stable and swept along the tree-lined banks of the Inny, she pointed out the secret lives and wild shenanigans of the so-called good-living folk of the saintly parish. He could hardly believe it until, safe beside the fireplace, she showed him how hypocritical people could be. The ones who danced their merry way to the front pew at Sunday Mass were as likely to be hurrying the night away as paying homage to a blind-eyed pulpit. And it wasn't always the attraction of the opposite sex that held sway. Some pillars of society sought solace in their own kind behind the blue doors, or in the quarry at Carrickboy, where their preferences were satisfied and people kept their mouths shut. It was a closeted society where pretenses were paramount and money could buy anything, simply because 90% of the money was in the hands of the 10%. There was no arguing that, and few did. Those who attempted to do so found themselves out of work and in danger of something unfortunate happening to their families or themselves. A shut mouth catches no flies, she told Seamie, as she steered him through the seedier side of life rather than have him victimized later through ignorance. He quickly saw where Ben's power lay and kept a firm but polite distance rather than hurt his feelings. Nevertheless, a strong curiosity tempted him at times. He decided to let the hair sit for now and see how Ben would seek to satiate his physical urges. It soon became clear that football was to be his saviour. The eagerly awaited challenge between the North and South was nigh. Ben called his charges together at games time after evening tea. The tennis tables, normally in high demand, soon fell silent as the teams prepared their plan of action for the following Sunday. Though keener than most, Seamie he couldn't help casting a wan look at the abandoned bats and silent snooker tables. He'd take on all challenges, win or lose. It was the thrill of winning. It was the thrill of winning that drove him onwards. Skills honed at home gave him an eagle eye and peripheral vision. His grandfather often remarked on how wide his eyes stood in his head and said it would be a godsend one day. Though puzzled by the observation at first, he accepted the old man's wisdom and waited for an explanation. No use rushing his fences, he thought. After all, he was supposed to have learned well at Tess's fireplace. The explanation arrived sooner than expected, and in a strange form, as a renowned guerrilla fighter told him of his heroes who appeared to have eyes in the back of their heads. Not at all, child, the old man continued. Their eyes were so wide set they'd spot a midge on the mountain without moving their heads. You'd need that, he continued, or a knife would be sunk in your ribs or in your back before you knew where you were. The old man's wisdom stood him in good stead as everyone piled out of the games room. In charge of locking up, he was invariably the last one out. As he turned the key, he thought he saw something move. Gallagly and Gibson were waiting for him. "Something up, lads?" he inquired, showing no trace of the fear he suddenly felt. "There will be tomorrow if you win the game." "Would you like to qualify that, or are you as cowardly as before?" Seamie asked, apparently nonchalantly. The truth was, he had spotted Ben materializing out of the darkness behind them. Like a red rag to a bull, they fell for the bait and into the trap. "Aren't you a right cocky for a culchie?" Gallagly sneered as Gibson pinned Seamie to the wall. "See if this'll get the message across," he said as he drew back to sink a blow into his stomach. That was as far as he got before he almost passed out with pain as Ben drove his arm up his back to breaking point. Gibson let go as if he had been speared. "Jesus, Ben, we meant no harm. Just a bit of fun before the game tomorrow," he pleaded as he got caught in the ribs with a haymaker. Gallagly tried to burst past, but got caught by a sucker of a headbutt by Seamie, who was primed like a pistol. "You fuckers never learn," Ben growled as he banged their two heads together. Though protesting they were only trying to intimidate and not to threaten, they took their punishment, knowing they were outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and in a blind alley. "Hold this, Seamie," he winked as he threw him his jacket. It was enough to distract him and kept his pal out of the impending fray. They dropped to their knees as he sank punches where they'd hurt but wouldn't show. There was no place to run. "That'll do for now, Ben. Fuck off, the two of you, if you know what's good for you." "Perfect timing, dear boy. Where did you spring from?" "I spotted them lurking under the stairs and pretended not to see them. Once they thought I was gone, they headed back to the hall. I knew they were up to no good, but wasn't expecting that kind of shite. I gave them enough rope to hang themselves, and the rest you know." He grinned as he threw a protective arm around Seamie's shoulders. That'll take the wind out of their sails for a while," he whispered as they sat down to their supper. They nudged each other as their pale-faced victims slipped quietly onto their benches without a glance in their direction. Seamie kept a wary eye on Barney to see if he smelt a rat, but there was no obvious sign of such. They'd have to be careful, he knew, as he was wide awake to the wiles of young men, and it wasn't that long since he had trod the same floorboards himself. Precious little escaped his beady eye. A pissy morning promised little as they took part in the Sunday Mass. The priest offered a prayer for better weather, but it was down for the day, according to Ben, who knew how to read the signs from minding sheep in the foothills of the mountains. "It's as good for the goose as for the gander," Seamie reminded him as they went about their morning chores. Known as the hardy hewers, in the underground language that invariably permeates such institutions, Ben, Seamie and company were quite happy to tone up muscles by cleaning and polishing the floors of the long corridors as well as the dining and recreation areas. Due to their rustic background, Mad Mike, ably abetted by his protege Barney, usually gave the heavier duties to those better able for them, knowing it was the best way to keep the whole crew happy. Roughly half of the lads from the south were from rural areas, where the majority of the lads from the wee north were townies. The less taxing duties of the laundry rooms, the hair cutting, the library and the chapel were assigned to them. This enabled a good balance to be kept both on and off the playing field, which, apart from the odd flare-up, kept things interesting. Generally speaking, strong bonds grew across the boards, irrespective of birthplace, unless, of course, they were influenced by the likes of Gallagher and his cronies. It was too early to call it yet, but most felt sure that the big game would soon sort things out. Barney mounted the rostrum after breakfast to inform them that the match was being brought forward to midday due to an unexpected but very welcome visit from the bishop. It was well known that the Bishop of Dublin had a healthy respect for the colleges and the quality of teachers that graduated from them. The fact that he and Mad Mike had soldiered together through university was another important factor in the relationship, which, some said, went deeper than the surface. Every table in the recreation hall was occupied as Seamie strode in after a quick visit to the girls in the kitchen. He had already built up a good relationship with the two cooks and found favour with the girls from the Mercy Convent laundries who had been lent by the bishop. Mostly from rural communities, they came to be there by gist of either an unfortunate pregnancy, abuse, a clandestine relationship, or any of the many mishaps one encounters in a quiet backwater in rural Ireland. Reports of these abuses invariably found their way to the parochial hall through rumour, innuendo, or more likely the housekeeper. The PP loved nothing better than to conduct his own inquiry into the rumour, thus affording him an opportunity to pry into the secret lives of his flock. That the bishop could also be distracted by such juicy titbits at their poker games in the palace was well known. There was also the problem of curates straying, so rather than risk them being caught in the marriage bed, they were assigned an accommodating housekeeper who'd be only too happy to oblige for such privileged work. It mattered little to the poor girls because hard work in a secure environment was far better than the awful situations they often sprung from. Money didn't matter that much, but clean accommodation, food and friends meant everything after the drudgery and desolation of the Mercy laundries. Many of those country girls found a haven of happiness in the boarding colleges around the country. Their escape brought relief to themselves and their families and often saved them from worse fates. Some of these girls were recruited to help out in the kitchen of the colleges, and it was one of those that caught Seamie's eye as he entered with a tray full of cutlery. Kate turned towards him and let out a gasp as she dropped a plate. "It can't be," she said in unison as they hugged each other, oblivious of those around them. "Well, well, well," Maisie the cook said as she tapped Katie on the shoulder, warning her someone was coming. They were all back at their posts as Barney entered. "These places cost money," he snapped as he saw Kate picking up the broken pieces. Blushing deeply, she apologized as he dismissed her and turned on Seamie. "We don't have all day, boy. Get on with your job and back to your studies." A sigh of relief signalled their narrow escape. Maisie told them she'd organise it so they'd have time to have a proper chat, but to leave it for now. "You won't believe what's after happening," he said to Ben as he joined him for a game of snooker laterly. Normally they'd be settling for a game of table tennis as it was their favourite, but being as cute as a pet fox, Ben reckoned there was something in the wind, and snooker was much more opportune for a quiet chat, especially if Barney was supervising. As they set themselves up, Seamie acquainted his pal with the astonishing news that not only was his old pal from Ballymahan working in the kitchen, but was also the cook's second in command. Ben was as flabbergasted as his comrade in arms, but listened attentively as he outlined his plan of action. He'd have to have a chat with her, of course, but he was in no doubt as to her loyalty or compliance. "You're as jammy," Ben grinned, as he listened to what his pal had to say. "They'll be dishing out the goodies at the game today, so play your heart out and I'll see what we can arrange later," was enough to motivate an army. It was enough for Ben too. "Jesus, I'll pull it out of the clouds if you set something up," he winked, as he sank a red, black, and another red, but failed to follow up. "Thought you might," Seamie laughed, as he grabbed his opportunities with both hands to take a sizable lead. Watching the line of shot while stalking each other out left them ample time to discuss various possibilities. Ben was like a young bull in a field of heifers. Realizing his heightened excitement might give the game away, Seamie advised him to get a hold on himself, or they'd all be bucked. Bowing to his obvious experience, Ben decided on a cold shower to cool off, and wrapped up the game in minutes. Tidying up after supper, Seamie seized the moment and slipped into the kitchen, where he spotted Barney taking a group of lads for a stroll around the gardens. The cook was expecting him and had sent him into the laundry room, where Kate was busy organising the ironing for a couple of her girls. Dismissing them immediately, she ran to hug him as the door closed behind him. "I bet you weren't expecting me to be here," she smiled, as she stood at arm's length to admire each other as after such a long time apart. "Indeed I wasn't, but sure nothing is surprising with you," he giggled as she gave him a playful dig. Knowing they hadn't all evening, she quickly explained how she came to be in the college. Although normally reserved for these less fortunate than her, she told him she had been recommended by a good friend who happened to be in the know. Like him, she grasped the chance of escape with both hands, and the rest was history. "You'll have to meet Ben, he said as he prepared to leave. "I've seen him with you several times, and so has Louise," she giggled as she saw the surprise in his eyes. "She'd love to meet him, if you could set it up," she said, without the slightest hint of embarrassment. "Leave it with me, was his passing words as he blew her a kiss before darting out to the kitchen. The cook was keeping an eagle eye for Barney as he emerged, and slipped him a note, which he stuffed deep in his pockets. "Don't be afraid of anything," she whispered, as she laid a maternal hand on his shoulder. Rather than rush away, he walked around the tables, pretending to check everything was ready for breakfast the following morning. He didn't dare look at the note until lights went out, but when he did, it was like reading Annabel's last letter before she disappeared out of his life forever.